Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning, I'm Jeff Kellam, the Parish Associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott, welcoming you to this week's edition of Encounter. Through the ages, music has helped us express the joy of life and its sorrow. Wherever we live or move or have our being, music says what words cannot express, and often says it better. When we deal in a time of loss and grief, requiems have been written to help us remember those that we have lost, to celebrate their lives and to remember them with gratitude and to give thanks to God for them and to help us cope with that loss. Through the years, of course, Mozart wrote dozens of requiems, I guess, and Brahms famously wrote a requiem in German, leaving behind the Latin so that the German masses could hear the requiem in their own language and feel their own heart beat in that music. Classical music is what we often call these masses or these requiems, but other genres have expressed this sense of loss and celebration as well. Jazz masses were written, I guess, well, we'll find out how long ago they started. I remember playing in its entirety a psychedelic rock mass called the Mass in F minor by the Electric Prunes. So musical genres are not necessarily limited to the classical and choral music of the church. A new jazz mass, a requiem, not a mass, but a requiem, has been written by the Reverend Bill Carter, and he is our guest today on Encounter.
Yep.
Not
Hi,
for
Jeff.
the first time.
Not
for the first time.
It's good to be back.
The idea of a requiem coming out of a time of loss, especially over the past couple of years,
Sure.
Is that the genesis of this idea?
Well, the genesis actually goes back 12 years. A friend of mine died of ovarian cancer, and I remember thinking jazz could touch this loss and express it and offer it as a gift, as her life was a gift. But the idea went on the shelf, and then my father died, and then my mother-in-law passed away, and then our friend Nancy's husband, Art, died. And I thought, maybe there's something here. And then the pandemic and all the loss we were experiencing, loss of routine, loss of confidence, as well as loss of life.
Right.
And so the music began to resurface, come off the shelf, and here it is.
Yeah. During this time of pandemic, when things seemed to close down, there were, we felt restrictions all over the place. And you were saying that sometimes this inflames a sense of creativity.
Sure. The heart of the Requiem would include three notes, G flat, an F, and a B flat, played in that sequence. And those intervals, those musical intervals, resurface again and again and again within the larger piece. It's 8 movements, and it follows loosely the way of the traditional Latin Requiem, but only one movement is in Latin, the rest is in English. Mm-hmm. As a Protestant, I'm not bound by Latin rules. And I also took a cue from John Rutter, whose famous choral Requiem years ago introduced other texts into the larger piece.
Yeah. And it's called Lux Eterna.
Right. Light eternal.
Right. And that reflects not simply the sadness of dealing with loss, but
right.
the hope.
Well, that's right. And a lot of people, when they're going through grief, speak of the paradox of how they feel. I was visiting with a family the other day that had lost the husband. of 63 years, and there was laughter in their home. And then they all almost apologized for it, and I said, no, this is part of the human experience. It's the loss and the laughter held together in the paradox, which is why this, it's exemplified in this Requiem, and it also is part of this larger album, which is full of these almost contradictory, paradoxical joy and sadness held together experience.
Yeah. As soon as folks experienced the premiere of the Requiem at your church in Clark Summit, folks were saying, "Oh, this should be recorded. You should hold on to this." And then the CD, you filled it out with some preludes and postludes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And hopefully it all holds together and tells a story from beginning to end. But the centerpiece is this 8-movement Requiem, Lux Eterna, and continues. It begins through the shadowlands of grief, drawing on both Psalm 23, Walk Through the Valley of the Shadow of Death, and the language of C.S. Lewis, the Shadowlands, and then Lord have mercy, and Blessed Jesus, and Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, and so forth and so on. At the end, the whole thing moves again to a major key, again relying on that little 3-note motif. That's how the thing moves.
Yeah. And this is not simply an instrumental mass. I don't mean simply.
That's right.
But you've added voices, which is new, fairly new for you.
Very much so. We relied on the talents and skills of the lyric consort, an 8-voice, usually a cappella group down in the Scranton area. They're all good, dear friends, and we have done things with them before. Years ago, we did the William Byrd Mass, a jazz version of that, set by a Toronto drummer. So they were the people I had in mind when I decided that I wanted to compose this and prepare it.
You'd written a couple of vocal pieces before.
I have.
Yeah.
I have. And reset some spirituals and some early hymns of the church.
Yeah. But this was now writing for 8-part harmony, I guess.
At points, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's my first choral piece.
Yeah. And then the band is made up of the Presby-Bop Quintet this time.
That's right. Anchored by Tony Marino on the bass, astounding bass player, Ron Vincent from the New York metropolitan area on drums, local great Michael Carbone on the saxophones, and then on French horn and trumpet and flugelhorn, Jeff Stockham from the Syracuse area, who was recently inducted into the Syracuse Music Hall of Fame.
Wonderful. And I've seen Jeff at the Firehouse. Well, and
right.
Mike Carbone and you and Tony, the whole gang.
We've been there. Yeah.
Yep. And then you're on piano. One of the few pianists, by the way, who have actually played with the Dave Brubeck Quartet.
That's correct.
Not too many pianists can say that.
He was taking a nap at the time.
Yeah, and so you were invited to sit down at the keyboard. And,
that's right.
Yep. And Brubeck's music, to go back to your roots, that's what kind of drew you into jazz to begin with, isn't it?
It was the beginning. My grandmother had given me a couple of LPs of this bespectacled pianist from Connecticut, and it was the first time I ever heard the delight of musicians making music pretty much on the spot, which countered the drudgery of having to record or to practice over and over and over again.
Yeah. Let's listen to a piece of the Requiem. Set this up. This is called Blessed.
Blessed. This is a setting of the Beatitudes of Jesus, and it's probably the standout piece that other choirs and church groups will be able to use at some point when we prepare it that way.
Yeah.
The Beatitudes of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew 5:1 through 12.
Okay, so we'll ask Chris Miller in our control room to play that. And this is unusual for us. We'll see how this goes. So that's called Blessed. It's part of the Lux Eterna, the light, eternal light, Requiem, written by our guest today, Bill Carter. And that's the Presbybop Quintet along with the Lyric Consort.
That's right. That's right.
So that is, tell us again where that comes in the Requiem.
That's about halfway through,
Yeah.
leading into the second half. There are familiar passages that come up often in times of loss and in memorial services. And years ago, I discovered that the Beatitudes of Jesus were included on the list of texts that were suggested, and it never really occurred to me to think of that. But what the Beatitudes do is they hold together this eternal, beyond time blessing with those who are in constricted and difficult circumstances. And in that paradox, there's a difference between mere happiness and deep joy. And it's the joy that I wanted to highlight. It is probably the most memorable tune on the whole piece, the 8 movements, and the one that, lifts my spirits every time I hear it.
Yeah, and me too. I hear it, and even coming back from the church that day, having heard it only once, but I've heard it several times since because I was there. And we have to point out that the recording that's going to be available, the CD,
Yes.
is not the church service or the concert we just saw,
That's
but
right.
You recorded it right, pardon the expression.
Professionally.
Professionally, that's the word. Done at Red Rock Recording Studio. Tell us a little bit about the studio there.
Oh, the studio is this great little facility tucked and folded into the mountains of the Poconos. And it has been the place where our good friend Sherry Miracle recently recorded a big band album with her band Diva. It's where the Phil Woods ensembles, quartet, quintet, big band have recorded as well. Leon Redbone has been there. Kent Heckman, the recording engineer, was tapped to record a live Keith Jarrett album at the nearby Deerhead Inn.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, and kind of the tagline is, we have the equipment and we know how to use it.
Bingo.
And we're quick, we can do a little bit of editing, but the environment there catches the sound and inspires more creativity.
Yeah, yeah. And the Mass, or I keep calling it a Mass, a Requiem, it's not a Mass, but it's a Requiem, would not fill out a CD. So tell us about the other music you used and
Sure.
how that fits into this whole idea of the paradox of joy and sorrow.
And this is the first album we've done in 6 or 7 years, so a lot has been amassed. So I sifted through it. It begins by a tune that we're using now for the title of the album called The Dancing Calvinist.
Which is a paradox in itself.
Which is, I know. So we have this comical kind of cartoon on the front cover. It's a tune from the 16th century, a psalm tune related to John Calvin. And the probable composer, Louis Bourgeois, who wrote Old Hundredth, the doxology tune, was imprisoned for changing a psalm tune without a license, which makes him probably the first jazz musician in the church.
Right.
He's one of our guys.
Yeah.
So we changed his tune without asking permission too, added some things to it, extended it, and it leads things off with a bang. There's another piece which follows, which is musical reflection on the Tagba incident, which is the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, kind of mysterious. There's a piece, personal reflection on aging, called Autumn Comes Quickly.
I can identify.
It does. It comes quicker every year. And then another one which was inspired.
And winter lasts longer, apparently.
Right, it does. Yeah. The fourth prelude is one called A Simple Act of Courage. And I keep changing who I dedicate that one to. I would dedicate it to the Capitol Police who stood up to the mob on January 6th in the past. I think this week I'm dedicating it to the people of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Because courage is what is most necessary to get through these trying times.
Right.
And at the end, I took an 8-measure melody out of the Scottish hymn book, again, a psalm setting called Kilmarnock.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very important to me a number of years ago before we went to Scotland and experienced the psalms sung in Gaelic. And I heard it and was moved by it. And then I heard the story of a Scottish pastor who had taken his own life after a series of tragedies. And one of the church officials was asked, "How do you feel about his fall from grace?" Mm. And this sober Scot looked at the interviewer and said, "Fall from grace does not fit our theological vocabulary." That grace is always around us, behind us, before us, above us. Yeah. And I thought that will pretty much kind of sum up the album. And all of that encapsulates this Lux Eterna in the center.
Right. So the album will be available, I guess, soon.
Well, it'll be available soon. It's at the manufacturers now. It'll be on our website, www.presbybop.com. Also, we have a Bandcamp, which is a website, Bandcamp page. And then it will be carried on Amazon and Apple Music and all the other download sites as well.
So it's called The Dancing Calvinist.
The Dancing Calvinist.
Presby Bop. I'm always curious about that. You hear this music in your heart, in your mind. You hear this music in your imagination, and then you have the talent to put it down in black and white on sheet music, and then eventually you hear the instruments play it. You hear the voices sing it. Does it turn out the way you expected?
It usually turns out better. And the key is to employ musicians who are better than you, and then have a relationship with them, so that you're not merely hiring a great player, but somebody who's part of the ensemble. You've traveled with him or her. You've had musical experiences that have enriched you. There's a whole lot of trust. And this gets kind of tossed into the cauldron, and that's what bubbles up.
Yeah. And the Presbyterian organization, 30 years probably, right?
Close to 30 years at this point.
Not all the same musicians, but
a lot of continuity.
A lot of continuity, yeah.
A lot of continuity.
Yeah.
This is the first project we've done without Al Ham, one of our founding members, but his presence and his mentorship have been lurking over my shoulder throughout this entire piece.
Right. But you do build up a sense of community, and I saw that in the studio when, after recording one of the pieces, you would all go back into the control room.
Control room, yeah.
And you'd sit on the sofas and you'd listen, and you could see everybody looking over at everybody else, and then you'd have to go fix something and.
We didn't fix a lot. Mostly in the control room, we sat there and just like shook our heads at the astounding artistry of Tony Marino on the bass, just playing those flying solos and doing amazing things.
Right. But also Kent Heckman, who's the engineer on this, things have changed since the days when I went into radio and we were cutting pieces of magnetic tape with a razor blade after marking it off with a wax pencil. Nowadays, the technology is such that he can go fix a note without touching anything other than the board.
Yeah, in the very first cut, in one of the editing mixing sessions, I went back in, I said, okay, there are 2/8 notes about a minute in that are a little too loud, and I play them with the thumb of my left hand. We found them. He just brought them down in volume. You can barely tell they're there. And he said, are you sure about this? And I said, every time I listen to the album, I will hear that.
Yeah. Yep.
And I don't want to hear it.
Yep. There was an album by Steve Goodman many years ago, sadly lost very early in age. And one of the songs was "If My Life Was on Videotape," and it was saying when I made mistakes, I could roll it back and edit it out, and my life would be just perfect.
Well, and Miles Davis, the trumpeter, once said rather famously, "There are no mistakes in jazz." And if he played a mistake, or an instrumentalist in his band played a mistake, he would, as pianist Herbie Hancock said, turn that poison into medicine. Because it's quick thinking music, it's reactive music. There's something in motion, and you can't go back and fix it. You simply have to play it and pray for forgiveness.
Right, and ask forgiveness sometimes of your fellow players who may have caught it before you did.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
When you compose, what is the prayerful approach you take? I think of writers who get writer's block and so on.
It's meditative. It's sitting with pencil and paper and keyboard and beginning to explore, and then asking a series of questions. Does this little piece of melody have any neighbors? How would it sound this way or that way? And then I often work with some college students in composition. I say, create a couple of notes, and then keep asking, and then, and then, and then, and see what unfolds in the narrative. It is not the time to edit, it's the time to explore.
Yeah. Don't second guess yourself as you go.
Editing comes later, polishing comes later, but in the moment, you literally let the muse chase you. You chase it, it chases you, and you see what emerges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that muse in the Christian church would be the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, who plants these ideas. And the sad thing is many of us ignore those ideas and don't act on them. I wonder sometimes about folks who would do well to write down their reflections. They're not poets, they're not novelists, but to write down your thoughts in a journal.
Right.
You know?
It's important to find ways to catch them.
Yeah.
I have a little app on my phone to record things. On just two bumps of my thumb, I can record something, and I have it for later to explore.
Yeah. When the Spirit speaks, there's an app for that.
I sure hope so.
Well, once again, the CD will be called The Dancing Calvinist, with that kind of image of John Calvin pirouetting or something.
Yes.
And then within the CD is this 7 movement?
8 movement.
8 movement. It's one better than perfection. Lux Eterna, a Requiem, which does pick up the sorrow and the sadness and the grief of remembrance of loss, but then turns the
Offers
page.
it up into the light.
Yeah. The light eternal, and that's where we're celebrating that part of the journey. So, thank you for
You're most
for
welcome.
this.
Thank you for the conversation.
Well, you and I have talked many times. You've been on the program previously talking about the Psalms and jazz, which follows kind of the same theme of lament and joy. And the psalmist often will begin a psalm with that kind of lament, or where are you, God? But by the end is reaffirming trust. Yeah. And so that becomes a theme beyond the Psalms into our everyday reflections of what life is like as we live and move and have our being.
That's right.
Bill Carter is the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania. I am Jeff Kellam, who is the parish associate, the retired guy at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. And I want to thank you for joining us for the Encounter program. In coming weeks, I'll be interviewing some folks who are helping to resettle some Afghan refugees in our community, and I invite you to join us for that. I hope that in the meantime, thanks to the Broome County Council of Churches, WBNG TV, for the Encounter program. We'll see you again next time, and then I hope that in the coming week you'll be gentle with people and, of course, with yourself.